Hello, folks. I wanted to do a video on this, and I didn't really know what to call this. This is like everything. This is my what I think is going on in the world. Basically, I have 3 pages of notes here, and I put a fair bit of thought into this. And this isn't everything, but this is all I think you can take in one video, basically. So I started on these notes. I did 1 page from where we are now to the flood, and then I did 1 page from 11,600 years ago to Noah and the flood. And then I have a third page of just random shit, kind of. I'm going to start with at the end, basically. The collapse of the USSR was the last time an empire collapsed on this planet, right? And we watched a lot of what that looks like. A lot of things were lost in that, some things were saved. But basically, every time an empire dies, this happens to some extent. But there have been many events throughout world history that have wiped it fucking clean from the map a few times. And I'm going to talk about some of those here and some of the things that we know for sure. And basically, if I was going to call this anything, I'd call this history is a lie, basically. I think, well, you'll see. So, before the collapse of the USSR, World War II was the next major kind of event. That was the end of a world. The world ended in World War II and a new world started. And you saw that with the 1950s shit in America and all the rebuilding of Europe and all of that. That was a new world that started then and is ending now. World War One was the death of the German Empire that brought about World War II. Like, really, those are one conflict. Most people don't get that, but in the eons in the future, World War One and Two and Korea and all of that will probably be considered one conflict. Napoleon before World War One. Napoleon's interesting because basically, for those not in the know, what happened is America had their own little revolution here, right? And we were allied with France, and a lot of our peeps were interacting with a lot of the French peeps. And at every level of society, this kind of hatred of their monarchy started fomenting. And I think a lot of that was fueled by the rich uppity ups talking to people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. I think basically we collapsed their uh, monarchy, and it caused a state of chaos that formed a French empire that then tried to take over Europe. And a whole bunch of shit was lost in that. Uh, and I would say that that was a world war. Napoleon fought everywhere. Like, they had battles in the Nile, they had battles in Europe, they had battles in Russia. Like, he didn't go to Asia, I guess, but like the Napoleonic Wars were a world war. And this is a theme you're going to see here: is that World War One and Two are not the first World War. The next one on my list is the French and Indian War, which is also known as the 7 Years' War in Europe. Why does the war have two names? Because it's actually World War One. The French and the Indian War and the 7 Years' War were fought between England and France throughout their empires around the world, mainly in North America and Europe. And I don't know. I think a lot of this colors the nature of what it is to be on this planet. That these massive empire clashes happen over and over again. The next one on my list is the Punic Wars. It was definitely a world war. That was the Carthaginian Empire and the Roman Empire duking it out in the Mediterranean, at least. And we lost whatever the Carthaginians knew. And the Carthaginians were what was left of the Phoenicians, for those that aren't in the know. And the Phoenicians were traders and sailors, and they went all over the place. Like, there's legitimate arguments for the Phoenicians being people that could have made it to America. So who knows what was lost there. And then the next world war I have on my list is the conquest of Alexander the Great. For those not in the know, he conquered the known world. He went all the way to India. That was definitely a world war. And a lot of what we are now was formed by that. And by that, I mean the Roman Empire was basically reconquering the empire of Alexander the Great. And they were doing it from Rome without an emperor. They were doing it with a fucking senate and shit and a whole new way of doing things and yada, yada, yada. But Alexander had already built that empire. It was there to conquer again because he had built it. And everything that we are comes from Rome. So everything that we are comes from Alexander in reality. And the next conflict on my list is the Trojan War / Bronze Age collapse. A lot of people don't realize this, but at the end of the Bronze Age, there was the Trojan War. And a lot of other shit happened besides that. It was kind of a bad time. In fact, it reminds me a lot of now. It's just everything's falling apart and collapsing in on itself. And we'll get to what happened in that collapse here in a minute, but the Bronze Age is fascinating. It's where all of our true history is, in my mind. Like, the shit that we don't know about the Bronze Age could fill fucking books, libraries even. This is where, all sorts of shit could have happened. But the first point on my list about the Bronze Age is that, Genghis Khan, how he's responsible for like a tenth of the people on the planet or something like that, DNA wise, some really high number. There are 12 of those that we have found so far in the Bronze Age that we don't have names for. All we know them by is the fact that they have a large portion of the population that is descended from them. And there are 12 of them. I think that's interesting. And this whole video is going to be a lot of, we know this. And maybe at the end, there's going to be some things that are like, I think this. But like, we need to establish known facts here because I think so much of history is unknown and or a lie. The other thing that I find interesting in the Bronze Age is the sea peoples. That's what the anthropologists and archaeologists call these people. They showed up. I think that's interesting. Showed up on boats and just kind of like conquered a lot of the known world, and no one really knows where they came from. They conquered everything but Egypt. And the interesting thing is, at the same time that they showed up, a famine showed up. And I think that the famine started in wherever these sea people came from, went through their country, and they took to their boats and started raiding like Vikings just to feed themselves. And whatever else happened, it caused the Trojan War to happen, I believe. And the ultimate thing that happened with the sea people was Ramses II in Egypt defeated them. It was like the First World War, really, I guess. These sea people, Jesus Christ, cat. Anyway, these sea people fought everywhere. Like, every known civilization in the Mediterranean dealt with these people and had people fleeing from them to Egypt, basically. And the reason that people were going to Egypt is because Egypt had made it known that they had hoarded food, and that I guess they were just welcoming anyone that wasn't the sea peoples to come and fight with them. And there was this giant fucking battle at the head of the Nile between Ramses II and the sea people, and he killed them all. Like, if there were survivors of that, we don't know where they went. So Egypt survived the collapse. All the Bronze Age survivors go to Egypt. I think this is where we get Solon going to Egypt. I think this is where we get Abraham and Joseph going to Egypt in the Bible. Some of the Bible is probably based on truth, and some of it is just who knows what. But I think for a fact, Abraham and Joseph were part of the what they call refugees and fallout from this collapse of the Bronze Age that everybody ended up in Egypt. They were basically the only ones that still had food and productive crops and that kind of shit. We could get into the what fors and whys of what could have caused that, but it doesn't really matter. But this all leads us to Solon going to Egypt and his stories to Plato. And this gets us to Atlantis. And what did Plato say about Atlantis? What did the Egyptians say about Atlantis? And what did the Egyptians believe? Okay, so Plato said that Atlantis was a kingdom or empire. It was an empire made of 10 kingdoms that was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Straits of Gibraltar, and that it had a giant capital city that was, concentric rings of shit with a center island with a mountain and all this stuff. And like, it just is describing a thing we can't find anywhere. I have theories, but that's what he said about it. And he said that the Egyptians said that basically the Greek people that were there were descended from the most ancient and noblest of races in the years past. They were highly technologically advanced and yada, yada, yada. And that these were the Atlanteans, basically. That the people that are in Greece now or whatever have no memory of this because they didn't write anything down for a very long time. They had a huge dark age. And the Egyptians told Solon that, for example, you only remember one flood. And there were many, many floods. And I found that very interesting, that the Egyptians told Solon that there was more than one flood. And they were talking about the flood in the Bible, right? Like the flood that flooded the whole world. And my thing is, I don't think these floods flood the whole world. I think there's dramatic changes in land and sea organization and shit. And some places are better than others, but like everything gets kind of upset to some level and it fucks things up. So the other thing that the Egyptians talk about that I find interesting is Zep-Tepi. Zep-Tepi is the before times when the gods ruled the planet. And honestly, it reads like the wildest science fiction and shit. You should go look into it. All the ancient alien stuff talk about that crap a lot. I don't know if the ancient alien stuff is real, but like the ancient Egyptians talked about gods ruling over them that came from the fucking sky. Okay. And I'm going to talk about Sumerian myths here in a minute. And this all bleeds into that because the Egyptians aren't the only ones that have legit stories of men in flying vehicles coming and being their gods. At least that's how I take the stories about Zep-Tepi. The stories about Zep-Tepi read like you're reading about an interstellar empire. And it makes me wonder if maybe this advanced civilization, or one of the advanced civilizations from before 11,600 years ago, if they weren't spacefaring, and if they didn't do some of the shit that we're doing now and go colonize the moon and Mars, maybe even. Like some of the things that make me think this is like the Great Pyramid reminds me of something out of Dune. Like it really is kind of odd, and I don't know. And I don't know if it's aliens or if it's that there was a civilization here before the collapse of everything 11,600 years ago, which we'll get to, that was spacefaring. I really think that there could have been. Which brings us to the floods. I think what we call the floods are a mix between different catastrophes, polar shifts, comet impacts, volcanoes, maybe even ice ages, the melting of ice ages, all of this shit. It just causes dramatic shit that, like, I think at this point, after so many thousands of years, all people remember is that they got flooded out because most people live near the ocean and the river. That's just the way it is. So people call it the flood. And everybody has a version of this story because the earth has changed so much because of pole shifting and comets and shit that the earth has changed so much because of all that shit that, like, there's no way to tell anymore, basically. But by my figuring, we can figure out the last few of these floods and when they happened. And that's the next page, is working from what we know about ancient history. And 11,600 years ago, a comet likely hit the ice sheet over North America. This caused a lot of different shit to happen, dumping that much fresh water into the ocean all at once. First off, that ice sheet was massive and it looks like the whole damn thing melted in a pretty short period, or at least a lot of it. And I think this caused a lot of different shit to happen. But I think North Africa is completely different than it was back then. I think the Americas are completely different than they were back then. The entire planet changed significantly from this comet impact, and no one in the mainstream science ever really talks about that. You'll hear about it from Randall Carlson and people like that, but that's it. And if you go through ice core data, this shows up in the ice cores. There's a huge pulse of meltwater into the oceans 11,600 years ago. And then there's another one 9,600 years ago. So 2,000 years after that, something happened. And I'm going to say that was a pole shift. And I think the pole shift finished off what the comet started. And as to why this happened or what it did, that's what we're going to get to here in a second. But I want to talk about the one that happened after them first, because I think it's important. Somewhere around 6,500 years ago, something happened. I don't know what it was, but it's about the time of the Bible's flood. And I think at that time, our population got reduced down to like a handful of people worldwide. I don't know how many individuals, but like birthing mothers, probably less than a couple dozen. And I think it's interesting that a lot of what I just talked about, of what we know from history, only goes back to halfway through the 6,500 years ago thing. Like, I brought us roughly to the time of Moses. 6,500 years ago is roughly the time of Noah. Okay. Just to put that into perspective for you, what we're talking about, like, Noah was a long time before Moses, if they're real. And I don't know what caused that. That's the one I don't really know about. Maybe you guys know more about that than I do. If you know something about any of this, comment it. Now it's just a list of stuff that we know about what happened before the Bronze Age, basically. Göbekli Tepe is weird. If you don't know about Göbekli Tepe, it is a giant stone megalith site that is akin to, oh, what are those called? Stonehenge? It's like a Turkish Stonehenge, but it's all intact and it's more intricately carved, and it dates from like 12,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, something like that. right in the time of all that collapse and bullshit. And it has relief carving, and it's got complex astrological observations built into it. It's an interesting site, and it's much, much better than what hunter gatherers are supposed to be able to do, which I think proves that there was farming there. And I think there's been farming a lot of fucking places, a lot of times. And wherever you have farming, it's not many generations until you start getting tech. And the thing that I think is most interesting about Göbekli Tepe is that the statues that they have there are these like tall white guys holding their junk. And the Easter Island heads, all the way on the other side of the planet, that are supposed to be carved by people in the fucking 14 or 1500s, uh-huh, uh, look exactly like these. Like, it's not, the heads don't look alike, but when you dig up these Easter Island heads, their arms and the belts they're wearing and everything else about the bottom part of these statues is exactly like the Göbekli Tepe statues. And I really think that there was a massive civilization on a continent in the Pacific, even maybe, that is now gone, that the survivors of which ended up in Turkey, maybe. And I think a lot of what is now modern civilization might be survivors of that. The other interesting thing about Göbekli Tepe is that it was buried by basketfuls of dirt. Whenever they dug it up, they could tell it wasn't buried by sediment. Someone buried it with baskets. And the Easter Island thing, like, history is a lie. History is recorded by fucking European explorers that don't even understand what they were looking at, I think. I think that's why the Easter Island shit is so fucked up, because the stuff that is on Easter Island that's super, super fucking old, they don't even look at, because it's, oh, well, that was built by these people. And we do that for a lot of things. Oh, well, obviously, the pyramids were built by the Egyptians. And I'm like, I don't think so. Sumerian myths. I mentioned this earlier, but the myths of ancient Sumeria are very interesting in relation to the Egyptian Zep-Tepi. The Egyptian Zep-Tepi stuff is all about the gods coming from space, right? Well, the Sumerian myths are all about the Anunnaki, which are the gods from space that came down and manipulated our DNA and made humans, and supposedly made us as like a slave race to mine gold or something like that. And some of that's Sitchin, and he's debatable as to whether or not he's right or not. I kind of tend to believe Sitchin's translation. I think it's pretty spot on. That's just my guess based on looking at all the rest of the information now. You also get, like, there's a version of the Moses and the flood myth in the Sumerian myths. And I don't know if that's because all of this happened a lot of times, or if, I don't know. I just think that's odd. Atlantis. I think it's pretty evident that Atlantis did exist. I don't know exactly where it was, but I think what happened was the Egyptians are descended from the survivors of the last surviving outpost of Atlantis. Either that, or like maybe it was like they were a different country, but some of them survived, kind of thing. Like, when I look at all of this, what I see is a global pyramid building culture, much in the same way that our culture was a global skyscraper and house building culture, kind of thing. Like, they went everywhere and they built these things, right? Well, did the English build all the fucking skyscrapers? No, there were Germans and Russians and Chinese and Japanese and American and French, and they all built skyscrapers. Well, it's the same thing with the pyramids. There was a bunch of different cultures and some sort of global trade network before 11,600 years ago that built pyramids. And I think that's where the myth of Atlantis comes from. I don't know where to go next with this. Let's talk more about pyramids. The Great Pyramid itself is a mystery. Like, Honestly, the fact that they think that anyone could have built that with bronze tools, I think is ridiculous. A couple of the stones in it just to cut them and move them 10 feet would be a miracle, much less to put them on top of a 400-foot pile of rocks. I don't know how that thing was built, but I'm guessing there's some sort of way to take away the weight of stone and make it to where stones float like hydrogen balloons. I don't know what that tech is, but I know that exists basically. And one of the things that makes me think that is the Coral Castle. You can go look that up. Some dude in Florida built a giant castle out of blocks of coral all by himself. Would never let anyone see him work. But these blocks are like multi-ton blocks of coral. And I think he figured out whatever the technique or trick was that the ancient Egyptians were using. And it's something really stupid and simple that like no one would think of or whatever, that everyone would be like, oh, that doesn't work. But somehow, because of our misunderstanding of the universe, we don't see how it works. But it does work. And I think the pyramids are evidence of that. Either that or there was some advanced alien civilization that built that shit. But I think it's very interesting that all these stories of Atlantis from Egypt, and when you go past the Pillars of Hercules, you do find other pyramids. And where do you find those? Uh, those are in Mexico, Teotihuacan. Sorry, Teotihuacan. That's the city of the gods in Mexico City. It's this big, massive complex. It's on an island. It had fucking boats and shit. I think it's a very probable that it could have been Atlantis, maybe, or at least it's part of the same civilization. Because obviously their civilization didn't have cars; they were boat-born people, and maybe flying machine people. And the city of the gods there is just very, it's weird. A lot of solar system shit that's built into it. A lot of just odd things. And the thing that I think is very interesting is a lot of these pyramids have pools of mercury under them somewhere. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if the pyramids are technological or religious, or I don't know why they exist, but they look like technology to me. Uh, Other shit that I think is weird and in this same vein, basically, is when you ask the Muslims and the Arabs who built the Great Pyramid, the common knowledge amongst the people is that Saurit built it. And when you probe into who Saurit is, you find out that it's Enoch. So, Enoch in the Bible, what do we know about Enoch? Well, Enoch walked with God. That's all it says in the Bible, right? Well, there's a whole book of Enoch, and it reads like crazy science fiction about this dude getting taken up to hang out with some people called the Watchers and learn about shit and come back and teach people and all this stuff. And you can go read the book of Enoch. And I'm not saying that's true. All I'm saying is that's what the people back in the day believed about Enoch. And I'm putting it to you that I think Enoch probably did go somewhere and learn some shit. And I think when he came back, he built the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx and some of that shit at Egypt and started this massive civilization. And I think that's, a lot of what this is we're looking at Enoch's civilization that grew to be evil to the point that the gods, quote unquote, flooded the earth and only saved Enoch's child Noah and their children. I'm like, okay, well, that's probably not 100% true, but obviously Enoch was given knowledge. He built some shit. Things started going horribly, and it caused the civilization to end, maybe. Or maybe just Enoch figured out shit and it did this. But meanwhile, Noah, being Enoch's son, watching all of this, is going, well, my dad's stupid. I'm going to start prepping for the end of the world and building a boat. That's what I see in that relationship. I think that's very interesting. I also think it's fascinating to me that a figure as strange as Enoch is tied to the Great Pyramid because the Great Pyramid is so strange. My third page here is all random shit that I believe is true that applies to all of this, I think. And that's the Nazi and Japanese flags of World War II are symbols for the sun god, aka Amun-Ra. The god of the Bible was Aten-Ra, or the Aten. And it seems like World War II might have been actually a battle between those two forces, with the English and America fighting on behalf of the Jewish people, basically, which I believe the Moses story happened, but it's a myth and lost in translation, and that basically the Jews are protected by something. And I think that's the Aten or Aten-Ra. And the Germans were killing the Jews. And I think something happened that caused our government to get involved in this. And I think maybe, like, throughout history, maybe these extraterrestrials and whatever really are talking to the leadership of our fucking governments and whatever. I think World War II was basically fought on behalf of alien gods, maybe. And I think that's really why the Nazis started to get so advanced. I think the Nazis went out and explored. They sent forces to Antarctica. They sent forces to the fucking top of the world in the Himalayas. They sent forces to Egypt, gathered up a whole bunch of shit, and then started fucking pouring money into looking into it. And the next thing you know, our bombers over Germany are being attacked by Foo Fighters. And these are just balls of light that come up and bounce around the airplane. They don't do anything. Interesting. Okay. The war ends, and there's a couple of alien related crashes that happened that I believe happened and I believe are connected to this. One is Roswell, New Mexico, 1947. I don't know exactly what happened there. I think one of these craft for one of these god races or the Watchers got too close to our fucking nuclear facility and we shot it the fuck down. And then Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, 1965, a bell-shaped craft crashed there with weird symbols on it. And my thought is the Germans had an experimental aircraft called the Glock, or the Bell. It disappeared at the end of World War II. What if someone got in that and flew off, and either they went so far to an alien planet or whatever that it took them a while to get back, and 1965 is when they got back, or it was a time machine. This is within the realm of possibility, apparently. And that, Hitler or somebody got in that thing and ended up in Pennsylvania in 1965 from 1945. I don't know which of those is crazier, really, but I believe that was a Nazi flown craft that crashed in 1965. And then I have on my notes, China, question mark. China is an oddball. Let's start with, they have more pyramids than anybody. They're all hidden under fucking grass and shit. And their first emperor's tomb is this giant thing with a terracotta army and a giant pyramid and all this crazy shit. Scale model of China with flowing rivers of mercury. I don't know what to make about China. It seems like China is just their own ball in all of this. And I think maybe the reality is that all of us, to some extent, work for one alien god or another, whether we know it or not. And I think China has always been ruled by its own god. It's outside of this fight between Amun-Ra and Aten-Ra and whoever else is involved. I think that their first emperor or something like that might have been some sort of extraterrestrial even. I don't know that for sure, but there's a lot of weird shit about China that I don't know how they figure into all of this. And it seems like our government and their government shared a lot of fucking secrets in between the 90s and today. And I don't know why we would be doing that. Because they're supposed to be our enemy and all this shit, but yet somehow their spies are very successful here. Antarctica. The Nazis went to Antarctica too, and I think this is weird because we have a giant military base in Antarctica. Operation High Jump after World War II went down to Antarctica, and there's all sorts of stories about what happened on that, about flying saucers attacking U.S. Navy ships and shit. And I'm like, did the Nazis find an old military base from Atlantis? Because if some of the stuff about 11,600 years ago and 9,600 years ago is true, Antarctica would have been ice-free and a completely different place, and it could have had a full civilization on it and been a part of this empire even. So who knows what they found in Antarctica and why we're still there. And Admiral Byrd, who led that expedition, tells the weirdest fucking stories on Earth. He said he flew a plane through a hole in the Earth to the inside of the Earth where there was a whole nother world. What I hear in that is he flew his plane through a wormhole and was on another planet. I think that's weird. I also think it's weird that there's like a little place at the center of Antarctica that's like Keb. It's like heaven. It's a hot spring fed area of Antarctica that's, maybe only like the size of a football field, but it's green and lush and it's 70 degrees there. And like you could live there and go walk out into the snow every day if you wanted to. And I thought that was crazy. I don't know why that exists, but it's one of those weird things about Antarctica. There's a lot of weird shit about Antarctica. In fact, the weirdest thing I think is that the entire world has agreed to like leave it alone basically, except for our fucking exploratory adventures. And those are all super, super approved. And, you cannot go to Antarctica until you've been trained on how to go to Antarctica and all this shit. And a lot of that is like limiting your impact on the environment. And I think that's because there are things that live in Antarctica, whether they're aliens or men from Atlantis or some shit, and they don't like the ice melting. And they don't like us polluting up their shit, maybe. And that's why I think there's something that lives in Antarctica, and it might even be an alien base. The point of all of this is that history is a lie. Okay, there's plenty of information here that you can go look up for yourself. That like we proceed from a point of discussion where we're like World War I, World War II. Well, first off, there's been about 1 billion world wars, and second off, history is always written by rosy-eyed people that won the war in their favor. So all of history is written by the victors. And all of history is a lie as a result. I would say the Bible is a lie. I think the Bible is completely made to control us. I think it was written at the Council of Nicaea by Emperor Constantine, and then it was even more heavily modified by King James into what we read. And I think there's still a little bit of like the good shit left in there, but most of that is just trash. Honestly, I would throw away your Bible and I would start researching mythology from around the world and try to figure out what God is to you, basically. I think it's a better search than just reading the Bible. Aliens are real. Are they gods? No. But from a certain point of view, some of them could be godlike. If you have the ability to, bend space and time and matter and do whatever the fuck you want, you're essentially a god in some ways. And I think some of those alien races and shit are actually like the Watchers, where they were saying they work for God. They, we go around and make sure shit doesn't get fucked up and we watch shit. And I think those are a biomechanical form of life put out there by the creative force in the universe to maintain his shit. And I think that's one of the things that we shot down at Roswell, to be honest. So what's real? I would say very little of what you see or believe around you is actually really true. Like, history-wise, I believe the gist of shit from the past couple hundred years. Past that, I question everything. I think a lot of what happens in America today is everyone is from this point of view of, oh, you have to have X, you have to do X, you can't do this, you can't do that. And in reality, you right now, if you wanted to, could just walk out of your house and never come back again. It would be rough for you, but you'd have to walk to the right places to get food and whatever. But there's places that you could walk in the continental United States that you could just hang out and feed yourself for forever. Okay, especially up in like Alaska and Washington and shit like that. Those areas where there's salmon, it's real easy to live up there. That's, I was an anthropologist. We studied cultures from around the world. If I had to pick a place to live in the ancient world, I would have lived in like Washington State. And I think you could go in some bad directions with that what is real thing. Like, is this all a simulation? I heard a theory that we are all the universe exploring itself. I think that's interesting. I guess that gets me to why are we here? And it seems to be that we are put on this planet to explore, to create, to learn, to love, to live and laugh and have fun. If you're not doing that, you're not right with God. And I think when you're not right with God, all you're doing is feeding your power to other people, and they're using that power to fuck up the earth. And that is what is happening currently. It's like we're run by psychic vampires, and they get off on making you do fucked up shit like sit in a cubicle all day and type on a computer, especially when it gives them the power and ability to control even more people. Which, when you don't say fucking fuck, I'm gonna go live in the woods and eat berries, they have that control over you. So like, if you don't have your own setup for everything, you're a part of the problem, in my opinion. And maybe this is like some eco hippie fascist bullshit or some shit, but I don't think everyone should be forced to live the way that I want to live. But in reality, you should force yourselves to live this way. It's, would you rather be free, or would you rather have air conditioning? This is your fucking choice. Because like right now, they're walking you down a road to fucking slaughter, and I don't know where the fuck it goes, but it's nowhere good. This is why I'm buying a couple of acres of land, maybe even 4 or 5 acres of land, 10 acres of land if I can afford it, and I'm going to build my own place that is self-sufficient and runs itself. Like, I plan on having solar and wind power and a fish pond and a herd of sheep and maybe some place to go hunt deer and a big ass greenhouse and a big ass blacksmith shop and a couple little tiny air conditioned cabins that are run by this gigantic solar system. And I think that's the best thing that I can do now, and I'm going to keep sending out this pirate radio message of fuck them, fuck what they want you to do, don't be a part of the machine, break free, go be yourself, be your own man on your own land with your own weapons, and fuck these people. You don't need this shit. If you live without air conditioning and heat, you'll find you adapt to it quickly, and it's nice. You're with the rhythm of the earth. I prefer that, to be honest. But you have to have a house that's set up to live that way in the climate that you're in. So, thanks for watching. I hope somebody watched this till the end. Tell me if you did, and leave me comments. I don't get any comments. So, thanks for watching.